Forget everything you think you know about ancient history being primitive. In the heart of West Africa, there once lived a king so rich that his spending broke an entire nation's economy. Not with war, not with conquest, just by giving away gold like it was nothing. This man's empire stretched across the Sahara. It controlled the gold that the whole medieval world depended on. It built a city of scholars, where hundreds of thousands of manuscripts were written, centuries before Europe's so-called Age of Enlightenment. This is the story of the Mali Empire. This is the story of Mansa Musa, the richest man to ever walk the earth. And it starts, not with gold, but with a boy who couldn't even walk. Our story begins in the early 1200s in a small kingdom called Mandin. There was a boy born into the royal family, but he was different from the others. He couldn't walk. For years, he crawled while other children ran and played. People mocked him. Some even called him cursed. His name was Sundiata Keita, but what looked like weakness was hiding something else. While Sundiata struggled just to stand, his homeland was falling apart. A ruthless sorcerer king named Sumaworo Kante had taken over, crushing every kingdom in his path, including Sundiata's own family. Sundiata and his mother were forced into exile. They wandered from kingdom to kingdom, with nothing. But somewhere in that exile, something changed. Sundiata finally stood up, and once he stood, he never stopped rising. He trained, he gathered allies. He built an army out of exiled princes and broken kingdoms who all shared one enemy, Sumaworo Kante. In 1235, everything came to a head at the Battle of Kirina. This wasn't just a fight between two armies, it was a clash between a tyrant and a boy the world had underestimated. Sundiata used clever battlefield tactics, alliances, and local knowledge of the land to outmaneuver Sumaworo's forces. By the end of the battle, the Soso Empire had fallen, and Sundiata Keita stood as the founder of a new power, the Mali Empire. But Sundiata didn't just want to rule. He wanted to build a system that would outlast him. So he gathered the leaders of the land, and together they created something remarkable, the Kurukan Fuga. This wasn't written on paper. It was spoken, memorized, and passed down through generations, an oral constitution. It set rules for how clans should live together, how power should be shared, and even outlined certain protections for people centuries before similar ideas appeared in other parts of the world. Historians still debate exactly how far its human rights ideas went. But one thing is clear, Mali wasn't just born from war. It was born from vision. A kingdom can win a battle, but gold is what keeps an empire alive. And Mali sat on top of one of the most valuable trade routes in the entire medieval world. To the north of Mali, deep in the Sahara, there were massive salt mines. To the south, hidden in the forests and riverbanks, there was gold, some of the richest gold deposits on Earth. Mali's genius was simple. It sat right in the middle of both. Every camel caravan moving salt south and every trader moving gold north had to pass through Mali's territory. And Mali made sure they paid for that privilege. This is where one of history's most fascinating trade stories comes in, something historians call the silent trade. According to old Arab accounts, gold traders from the south would never even meet the salt traders face to face. Instead, they would leave their gold on the riverbank, then step back and hide. The salt traders would arrive, look at the gold, and leave the amount of salt they thought was fair. Then they too would step away. If the gold sellers were happy, they'd take the salt and leave. If not, they'd wait until a better offer appeared. Some historians believe this was done to protect the secrecy of Mali's gold mines, since nobody outside ever learned exactly where the gold came from. Whether every detail of this story is completely accurate is still debated, but the core truth is not. Mali controlled a gold supply so valuable that protecting its source was a matter of national survival. To manage this booming economy, Mali didn't rely on chaos. It introduced standardized weights for trade and used cowrie shells as a form of currency, creating one of the most organized economic systems of the medieval world. By the 1300s, most of the gold circulating in Europe and the Middle East had passed through Mali's hands at some point. This wasn't luck. This was engineering, economic engineering, built on salt, gold, and control of the routes between them. And all of this set the stage for one man who would take Mali's wealth and show it to the entire world. By the time Mansa Musa took the throne in 1312, Mali was already wealthy. But Musa didn't just want wealth. He wanted the world to know about it. In 1324, Mansa Musa set out on the Hajj, the Islamic pilgrimage to Mecca. But this wasn't a quiet religious journey. This was one of the most jaw-dropping displays of wealth in human history. Historical accounts describe a caravan stretching for miles, with thousands of soldiers, officials, and servants. Estimates of the total number of people vary widely, with some accounts describing tens of thousands, though historians debate the exact figure. What almost everyone agrees on is the gold. Camels loaded with gold dust, hundreds of enslaved attendants, each reportedly carrying gold staffs. This caravan didn't just pass through cities, it transformed them. When Musa's caravan reached Cairo, he began giving away gold generously to the poor, to scholars, to officials, to anyone he encountered. It sounds like generosity, but it had consequences. According to the Arab historian Al-Umari, so much gold flooded into Cairo's markets that the value of gold itself crashed, prices spiked. The local economy in Cairo reportedly struggled to recover for over a decade. Let that sink in. One man's vacation spending disrupted an entire regional economy for years. And here's the part that changed history forever. News of Mansa Musa's wealth spread across the Islamic world and eventually reached Europe by 1375. A Spanish mapmaker included Mansa Musa on the famous Catalan atlas, depicting him seated on a throne, holding a giant gold nugget. For the first time, West Africa wasn't just a rumor to European mapmakers. It was a golden empire, worth exploring, worth trading with, worth remembering. Mansa Musa didn't just go on a pilgrimage, he put Mali on the map. Literally. Wealth alone doesn't build a legacy. What Mansa Musa did next is what truly made Mali unforgettable. On his way back from Mecca, Musa brought scholars, architects, and poets back with him to Mali. One of them was Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, an Andalusian poet and architect. Under his influence, the city of Timbuktu began to transform. What was once a seasonal trading camp slowly became one of the most important cities in the medieval world. The Jingwareber Mosque was built around this time, constructed from mud brick, in a distinctive Sudano-Sahelian style that still stands in Timbuktu today. But Mansa Musa wasn't just building mosques, he was building minds. Timbuktu became home to the University of Sankore, a center of learning that attracted scholars from across Africa and the Islamic world. Subjects taught there included law, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. Over time, Timbuktu's libraries and private collections came to hold hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, some of which still survive today. Think about that. While parts of medieval Europe were struggling with widespread illiteracy, scholars in Timbuktu were writing, debating, and preserving knowledge on a massive scale. This wasn't an accident. It was the direct result of Mansa Musa's vision that an empire isn't just measured by gold or territory, but by the knowledge it protects and passes on. For a while, it seemed like Mali's golden age would never end. But every empire, no matter how powerful, eventually faces its greatest test, not from outside, but from within. Mansa Musa died sometime in the 1330s, and with him, Mali lost its greatest unifying force. What followed was something that has toppled empires throughout history, a succession crisis. Different heirs and nobles competed for the throne, weakening the central authority that Sundiata and Musa had worked so hard to build. While Mali was distracted by internal power struggles, threats began growing on its borders. To the east, a rising power called the Songhai Empire began asserting its independence. Songhai had once been under Mali's control, but as Mali's grip loosened, Songhai's ambitions grew stronger. At the same time, the Mossi kingdoms to the south launched repeated raids into Mali's territory, further stretching its resources. Piece by piece, Mali's vast empire began to shrink. By the late 1400s, Songhai forces captured Timbuktu itself, the very city that Mansa Musa had transformed into a beacon of knowledge. The empire that once controlled the gold of the medieval world slowly faded from the center of power to a smaller regional kingdom. But here's what's important. Mali's story didn't end in failure. Its systems of trade, governance, and scholarship influenced West African kingdoms for centuries afterward. The legal ideas from the Kurukan Fuga, the trade networks across the Sahara, the intellectual traditions of Timbuktu, all of these outlived the empire itself. Empires rise and empires fall. But what Mali proved is that long before European contact, West Africa was already home to sophisticated governance, thriving global trade, and centers of learning that rivaled anywhere else on Earth. From a boy who couldn't walk to an empire that controlled the world's gold, from silent trades on a riverbank to a pilgrimage that broke an economy, from mud brick mosques to libraries holding hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, the Mali Empire wasn't just wealthy, it was visionary, and its story deserves to be told again and again. If you learned something new today, hit subscribe, because we're covering the rise and fall of history's greatest empires every single week. Let me know in the comments which empire should we cover next. Thank you for watching Empire Tales, and I'll see you in the next one.